Our presenter for the 1 p.m. time slot is Andrew Renner. He is from Pickerington, Ohio, and will be sharing with us his capstone project, redesigning the Honda S2000 for 2025. Please join us in welcoming him.
So my name is Andrew Renner, like I've already said, and I think Honda should revive the S2000. So I'm a big car guy. A few of my dream cars that I've seen are cars like this, the 911 GT2 RS, the LaFerrari Aperta, the McLaren 675 LT, and my personal favorite, this Pagani Huayra BC. But that's just the thing. These are dream cars. The average person cannot afford this $4 million Pagani. That's where normal companies come into play, and they give cars to the average consumer that they can buy, enjoy, afford, and be able to repair without having to spend $50,000, $60,000 on an average repair. That's where you get companies like this, Mazda. In 1989, Mazda released this, called the MX-5 Miata. It only made 113 horsepower, but it was really lightweight, and it came in at only $13,800, which is about $28,000 in today's money. That got the eye of one company in particular, Honda. In 1989, Honda looked at their lineup and thought it could use a little bit more spice. So they got to work, and in 1995, they showed off with this concept called the SSM. And nobody really thought much about it until in 1999, Honda came out with the full release of their S2000. Now, S stands for sports, and 2000 stands for the displacement of the engine. So it's a 2,000 cubic centimeter engine. This car was a 240 horsepower. It was rear-wheel drive. It had a 6-speed manual. It had a 9,000 RPM redline, which is crazy high. But then the thing that this car is known most for is its perfect 50-50 weight distribution in the front and the back. But most importantly, it had Honda's badge of reliability, which is a big thing for sales because everybody knows that Honda is one of the most reliable vehicles out there. Now, they did not just come up with this vehicle out of nowhere. They actually looked to their past, sort of like I have with this project. In 1962, they showed off this concept called the S360. Then a year later, they sold to the public the S500, then the S600, and then in 1970, they finished off production on the S800. So they waited 29 years to revive the S800 as a brand new S2000. And this car came in 2 different generations. First off, you have the AP1, which was produced from 1999 to 2003, and then the AP2, which was produced from 04 to 09. And mechanically, there were a few very slight differences. Visually, same thing. So if you look at the right, the AP2 S2000 just has new rims, updated LED headlights, a modernized bumper, and then in the rear, it's the same story. Updated bumper and new taillights. But that brings us back to Mazda. Mazda is now onto their 2nd generation of the Miata, so I think it's appropriate to compare the two. Starting with price. The S2000 starts at $32,000, and the Miata goes from about $22,000 to $26,000, which is a pretty large price gap between the two, but Honda was sure that their S2000 was that much better of a car. So starting with power, the S2000 was much more powerful than the Miata. It made 240 horsepower versus only the 142 of the Miata. It was a little bit heavier, but that didn't make a difference. Its 0 to 60 time was 5.8 seconds, which is nearly 2 seconds quicker than the Miata's 7.5. And then also, the Type R only came with a 6-speed manual, while the Miata, they kind of messed around with both a 4-speed automatic, a 5-speed manual, and a 6-speed manual. So then we come to the AP2, and of course, it's changed a little bit over time, but mainly, Mazda's now onto their 3rd generation of the Miata. And comparing the two, the AP2 got a little bit torque, which added a tiny bit more performance, but the Miata, they made some big strides. You see, Honda got them thinking. People want more performance out of their car. So that's what they did with this car. They gave it a lot more horsepower and a lot more torque, which means they brought that 0 to 60 time down to only 6.4 seconds, which was big for the brand. And it started to close the gap of performance from Miata to Honda. And then finally, in production, Honda came out with this version of the S2000 called the CR, which stands for Club Race, and it was pretty much the same. It had a little bit of a body kit, it had a bigger wing on the back, it had an option to remove the AC and the radio to reduce weight, and then it also didn't come with a soft top. it came with this hardtop, which you could unlatch and lift off and leave in your garage if you wanted to go out for a drive with the top down. That comes to the big question. Why do I believe Honda needs to revive this car? They finished production 11 years ago, but I think now is the perfect time for them to start to focus on reviving the car in the next generation. So first off, I would say Honda's in a similar position that they were in 1989. Looking at their lineup, they have vehicles like the Odyssey, the Ridgeline, the HRV, the CRV, the Pilot, the Fit, the Accord, the Insight, and the Civic. And nothing is like really super sporty, despite Honda's incredible racing past. Except for the car down on the bottom right, that's a Civic. The Civic came in 3 different trim levels. It comes in a 2-door coupe, a 4-door sedan, and a 5-door hatchback. Now, the sedan and the coupe come with this trim level called the SI, which stands for Sport Injected, and that's really all it is. They just inject a little bit of sport into it. They give it a 6-speed manual, they give it a rear wing, and they give it stiffer suspension. But besides that, that's really all it is. It's not a real sports car, except for the hatchback variant. They came out with this version called the Type R, which stands for Type Race, which sounds a lot more extreme than Sport Injected. And this car comes with 306 horsepower, about the same torque. It also comes with a 6-speed manual. Not only that, but it's a crazy looking hatchback, and it's the fastest front wheel drive car that you can buy on the market to take around a racetrack. But that's just the thing. It's a front wheel drive car. This makes a better car for somebody that wants a car that they can drive daily that is fun, not so much of the target audience of the S2000, which is for cars, for people that want a second car, a car to take to church on Sunday, a car to take out on a date, kind of more of a fun car. Not only that, but most sports cars are rear-wheel drive setup, maybe sometimes all-wheel drive. Being a hatchback Honda Civic, it's a front-wheel drive, which really doesn't give you that full sports car feel. Second, I would say competition is coming out with some pretty strong cars right now. You have companies like Subaru, Toyota, and Nissan, which are coming out with like cheaper, more affordable, lightweight cars. You have kind of the heavy American muscle cars. And then the 2 at the bottom are what I want to put more of an emphasis on. On the bottom left, you have the new Mark V Toyota Supra, and then there's also cars like the new BMW Z4. These are a little bit more expensive. They have nicer interiors, but they cost quite a bit more. They come in starting around $50,000 and will go up to maybe $65,000 or $70,000. But then in the bottom right is a new 4th generation Mazda MX-5 Miata, which starts at only $27,000, which is big for that car. And that's a tall order for Honda to live up to in order to compete with it. So I want to compare the 2009 S2000 to the new Miata. Keep in mind the S2000 has been out of production for 11 years, and it started production 21 years ago. But comparing the two now, the Miata has gotten a lot more expensive. It's almost closed the gap between the S2000 and the Miata. But also, Mazda learned that people want more and more power. So that's what they did. They gave it even more power and more torque. And now if you look at that 0 to 60 performance figure, it's down to 5.7 seconds, which is big for the car at its price point, which means Honda has a really tall order here. Next, I would say there's a lot of market interest for this car. One car in particular to think about is the Mark IV Toyota Supra. This car was produced from 1993 up to 1998. And Toyota realized that there was this growing interest for the car. So what they did is they got to work and they came out that Mark V, which I showed you a minute ago. Well, the same thing is happening with the S2000. Plenty of them are selling for resale at $50,000, $60,000, even a few at $70,000, including there's one for sale currently on Bring a Trailer, which is probably going to hit a record for the car. It's at $65,000. People are estimating probably about $80,000 to $90,000 that it will sell for. And so I think Honda needs to take advantage of this growing popularity for the S2000 and really emphasize on it while it's at a peak. And finally, I would say Honda has some good parts that they can reuse in this. That being the Type R engine. Like I mentioned, it makes 306 horsepower. And then also with the name, I said the displacement of the engine in the S2000 was 2,000 cc's. That's where they got the name S2000. Well, the same thing can happen with this engine. It's about 2,000 cc's, so they can have true roots to keep the name and really keep that brand going. But I don't think they should use this exact engine. You see, there's another version of the engine which comes with a smaller turbo that they put in one of the editions of the Accord, and it makes 258 horsepower. And I think this is the proper engine for them to use in it. I will explain more on that later. Besides that, every review that I've watched and read about the Type R, people say it has some of the best transmission of any vehicle on the market. It's a 6-speed manual, and people say there's really bar none, especially in the price range. Not only that, but Honda has already done plenty of research and development on their seats and their infotainment systems, and those can all be parts that they don't have to do more work on. They can just take those and put them in the new vehicle with maybe a new skin on it, and that's it. So that comes to my last point, the design. I wanted to stay pretty true to the roots of the S2000. It still looks like it. Let's start with the rims. So I took the Type R rims, how it has like these V-shaped spokes, and I took the shape of the CR rims on the S2000, and I mixed them together to come up with these. I wanted to keep sort of the face of the car. So as you can see, I kept the general shape of the grille and the general shape of the headlights. The roof of the car is gloss black, and that's to go along with the S2000 I sold before. The body would change colors and things like that, but the roof was always black. So I wanted to keep that element in it. The smaller air vent on the front, that would be to intake air and take it right to the front brakes to increase performance, especially in track use. Using the Supra again as an example, you have the new Mark V compared to the Mark IV on the bottom, and they don't really look that similar. And some of the traditionalists out there complained a lot that it just didn't have the same soul. It didn't have the face of the Mark IV. So some people that are really good with Photoshop got to work and they came up with concepts like this. And I saw these shared all around Instagram on my car page. And really what people were doing is they were taking that face of the Supra, the mouth and the eyes of it, and they were bringing that back because that was one of the distinguishing characteristics of what made the Mark IV the Mark IV, and the Mark V lost that. So I wanted to keep that with the S2000. I kept those shapes, but I slimmed them down a little bit in order to modernize them. Looking at the rear, there's a couple things I want to point out. First off, you have the two taillights with the third brake light kind of working as like a ducktail, and I like how they're almost connected, almost in a light bar. And then also the lower rear diffuser molds around the two exhaust pipes, and I wanted to keep those elements. Looking at the Civic, I want to point out a few things I do not want to do. First off, I like the idea of having the light bar taillight, so that's something I want to keep, but I do not like how thick and heavy the taillights are on the ends. I want to slim those down, and then I don't like how they stick so far out of the car. So I want to kind of push them into the car instead of stick out. And lastly, something I do not want to do is down at the bottom of the Civic, you can see a lot of plastic. And it's printed in a pattern that is sort of like a fake air vent. And a lot of people complain about this. So that's definitely something that I want to work away from. So looking at the rear end, this is what I came up with. I kept a pretty distinguishable Honda shape for around the edge of the taillights, but I connected it in a light bar that's pretty subtle and modern. The license plate holder is pretty basic. It's just sunk into the car a tiny bit. I do not want to draw a ton of attention to that. And underneath the ledge there might be like the release for the trunk and then maybe a light to shine down on the license plate. I kept the two exhaust tips and I molded the diffuser around those exhaust tips, and then I gave it some more aggression, which also does help with downforce on the car for the airflow underneath. The vent in the rear, I think, should be a functional vent. All the air pressure that gets trapped in the rear wheel well can blow out through that vent to add extra performance. Looking at the side, there's a couple things that I want to change, or there's a couple things that I want to look at. First off, there's this line that runs up the car. I want to keep a little bit of that harsh line, but second off, I want to keep the swoop up the side. So with my final design, I kept the swoop. I changed the size of it a little bit, but I also cut it out of the car, and there can be a plastic side skirt. This is just to add a little bit more futuristic look as the vehicle market design changes. And then I also kept that harsh line, but I give it more dimension just to modernize the vehicle. Now, one thing you'll probably notice by my design by now is the S2000 came with a soft top, and I've designed it with a hard top. Well, that was on purpose. I've designed this as more of a Targa instead of just a soft top. And part of that comes from my past with the soft top. I drove a Toyota Solara convertible for a year, and it really taught me some things about soft tops that I really kind of hate. First off, I feel too exposed when I put it down. I feel like everybody can stare at the back of my head, so that was one thing that I did not like. Driving on the highway, it's also very noisy. Noise from all the other vehicles comes in through the soft top and just creates issues. And then probably the biggest one is when I got out to my car in the morning to put my backpack in my car, I couldn't set my coffee on top because it would fall over. That's a pretty big deal for me. Not only that, but you get other benefits of something like a Targa. For instance, it's going to increase rigidity of the car. This will give a stiffer ride, which will make it a little bit more fun around corners. Second off, for rollover protection, if you are ever in an accident and the car rolls over, that extra roll bar will give the driver a little bit more protection. And basically, just how a Targa works is you're going to have a panel above the driver and a panel above the passenger. There'll be a clip in the front and the back on each. You unclip those and you can lift the two panels out. Then you can either leave them in your trunk or leave them in your garage if you want that trunk space. So here's a view of what the taillights look like, off, on, and then during braking. As you can see, since I have a light bar, that only counts for two of the taillights technically. So I added my third, but I added it down lower, just as I can see more vehicles doing that in the future as a modernizing trend, instead of sticking it right behind the rear windshield. Now, I've mentioned the Type R a lot, but that's because it's Honda's sportiest vehicle. And up above, you can see a pretty basic hatchback that Honda sells. And looking at the comparisons, they're pretty simple. They gave it a new hood, a new front bumper, a different diffuser, a wing, a better side skirt. Pretty basic things, and it's very inexpensive to add those body panels to the car and make it look a lot more extreme. Well, I think they can do the same thing to the S2000. That is why I thought they should put the downgraded 2.0T engine in this car that only makes 258, is because if you can sell another version of the same thing for a lot more money, you might as well do it. That's just business 101. So this is what I came up with. Just adding a little bit more aggression to the car. And that's so somebody that spends the extra money on the Type R variant feels like they bought something special. Yeah, it comes with a lot more horsepower and a little bit more torque, but it also looks the part. It looks like a more extreme car. And it's the same story in the rear. I added things like a ducktail, red pinstriping to the sides, and an air blow-off vent around the front tire, and then also the red Honda Type R badging. So finally, I want to compare my current car to the 2020 Miata. And I think they'll be able to keep the prices down. Honda has kept the prices on their Civics going lower and lower in comparison to past years, actually. But with the new engine, it's going to get much better performance. I think even with the downgraded engine, its 0 to 60 time will be about 5 seconds flat, maybe into the upper 4.9. And I think performance is really what's going to sell this car, besides looks and new technology. But especially, it's going to need that performance to boast a slightly higher price tag than the MX-5 Miata. So in the end, the reasons why I believe Honda should remake the S2000 is they're sort of in that position in that they were in 1989, where they just seem to add a little bit more sport to their lineup. They've always had a background in racing, and they're kind of losing that. They need a little bit more of a sports car to throw their racing technology into and really get people excited about the brand again. Second off, their competition is coming out with pretty great sports cars, and they're missing that hole in the market. Third, there's a growing interest for the S2000. I think they should capitalize on it while it's still a big thing. And fourth, they have the perfect engine and transmission, as well as some other parts like the infotainment and the seats and stuff that they can put into this car, which don't take any more research and development, and they will fit perfectly in a car just like this. So I want to say thank you for listening to my presentation. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to text Gabe at this number. Thank you.
Great job, Andrew. First question, and this is similar to the question we asked Luke. Do you have any industry contacts, or have you been able to share this with anyone in industry yet?
I have not. No, sir.
Okay, well, we might have to do something about that. I see you have a kind of a silver color here. What were some other colorways that you were exploring?
The S2000 has used a lot of colors like a flat red, a yellow, blue, black, white. Those are some of the most popular colors. When they sold the S2000 before, those colors were pretty flat colors. I think with a modernizing of cars, a lot of cars have started to use a speckled paint that has a little bit more depth. And so if they take the same color schemes they had before, but add that speckle to it, I think those will complement the car very well.
Do you have a flagship color in mind?
Because the S2000 CR, the Club Race, was kind of like the final edition, and it had that like Smurf blue. I think that Smurf blue would actually be a really good start for the S2000.
Okay. What do you think the Miata will look like in 2025, and how did you take those features into account as you were designing your model for 2025?
So I think Mazda is going to keep adding a little bit of horsepower. They're not going to go too far outside the realms because they want to keep the car lightweight, and they don't want to add a ton of horsepower to such a lightweight car. So we're going to see a little bit of change in design, and maybe as the rest of their lineup gets new technology and infotainment systems and stuff like that, they're going to redesign that. The fourth generation was a pretty radical change for the Miata, so I think the fifth is not going to be a huge difference. Now, one thing that I did draw inspiration from is the Miata. They always sold a soft top version of the car only, but with this fourth generation, they also sold a Targa alongside. So that's kind of where I got part of the inspiration for a Targa top to the S2000.
Great. In your research, did you find any projections for interests in electric versions of a vehicle like this?
I did not really do any research on electric vehicles, and that's just part of the fact that for vehicles like this, I don't see them moving to a hybrid system or fully electric quite yet. I think there's going to be another full generation of cars before we start to get into it. I think it's probably going to be around 2020 or 2033 to 35 that we're going to start to see a lot more hybrid. And then probably another 10 years beyond that before a lot of stuff moves to electric.
Okay. If made available in the US, would you pick this over a 2025 Focus RS?
Ooh, I have a soft spot in my heart for hatchbacks, but this would definitely be a good competitor.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? Just give it a few more minutes. Andrew, I do want to commend you on your thoroughness as you were considering all the design aspects of this, because you could have just kept this a surface level design and focused on the styling, but I know you are such a car guy that you get excited, you get pumped about the every aspect, every spec of this car. So I appreciate the fact that you dove into the guts of this thing and thought, how can we make this so that not only do we carry on the aesthetic features from the S2000, but how can we make sure that this is a car that maintains the legacy of the performance brand that Honda has established. So I do want to commend you for that.
Thank you.
Good, good. Well, everyone, thank you so much for your questions. If you would join me in congratulating Andrew on a job well done. Andrew, you did it. Good job.
Thank you.